Thank you, Tina. Good morning, Creative Mornings. I love sitting in the audience. TBD how I feel standing on stage, but so far so good. Thank you, Tina, so much for having me. It's so special to be here on the launch week of my book. I'm Carla. I'm an impact strategist, a facilitator, a community builder. My hobbies include putzing around the house, learning about astrology. I divide my time between Joshua Tree, California, and upstate New York, and I happen to be the luckiest person in the world because my neighbors are Tina and Gideon, who you've both met tonight. These are a couple ways for you to know me beyond what we will dig into in the presentation, and I'm so grateful that you are all here to talk about my weird obsession, which is a topic that we have all been trained, whether we know it or not, to avoid, to sweep under the rug, to not talk about. But today, we're going there. Before I get hot and heavy on the slides, I want to invite you all to close your eyes. And you might be like, lady, I'm a New Yorker. I don't close my eyes in public. I get that. Just soften your gaze. And I invite you to feel the plush chair under your tush, to feel your feet on the ground, to breathe in and exhale whatever subway stress you experienced in arriving here today. And now the next question I'm going to ask you to envision, I always think that first thought, best thought. Whatever comes to mind first is the way to go. I want you to pull into your mind's eye the image of a person, a place, a thing, a way of life that you have grieved. And this might be an obvious one, like a significant friend, parent, sibling who's no longer physically here, who's died. It might be someone that you were in a relationship once with that you're no longer with. It might be a home that used to be your home but no longer exists or that you no longer live in. And I want you to bring an image of this person, place, or thing into your mind's eye, and I want you to greet it. It might look like a hug. It might look like a curtsy. It might look like holding a strong, energetic barrier between you and this person, place, or thing, which is totally legit. And then if it feels comfortable to you, I would love for you to invite this person, place, or thing, its spirit, its memory, however you want to think about it, to join us for the next 20 minutes, if that feels good to you. So now that we have doubled in size in this room today, I'd love for you to think this person, place, or thing, release the image from your mind's eye, feel your feet on the ground again, feel your butt in the seat again, love the red velvet, breathe one more time, and open your eyes, or sharpen your gaze. So my personal kink would be we all go around one by one and talk about who that was, and if this was a 8-hour workshop, we would definitely do that. But we're not, so I'll go. This is my dad. He's awesome. He's also dead, and I'm also sorry for my loss, but I love this guy. I love him still. He wasn't really into fishing, but I just think this picture is like so stinking cute that I went with it. He was a complicated person, really smart. He studied orchestral conducting at Juilliard, just across the park. He later went into the wine business, and my favorite thing to do with him was to sit around our family table, and I obviously wasn't drinking wine at this age, but break bread, have meals, tell stories. And it was just about when I was peaking in my New York City club rat era when he got brain cancer, and I moved from New York into his home in San Francisco and took care of him as he was dying of cancer. It was intense as hell, but it was honestly one of the greatest honors of my life. And what I learned as I got drop-kicked into the world of grief and loss, very much against my will or interest, was that culturally we're pretty good about what you do for the first 40 days. We know how to send the gift baskets. We generally have an action plan around a funeral or a memorial. But I realized that once the kind of dust settled and everybody else was kind of getting on with their lives and I was trying to figure out what is new normal for me without my dad, I didn't really know where to start. So I did what any elder millennial would do, and I Googled it. And what I found was a couple quick takes. One, the aesthetic of grief, very drab, very one note. Really I don't mean to troll this girl, but it was all about holding your head heavy in your hands and this sort of singular emotional tone of sadness. And then there was also this 5 stages of grief thing, which as the type A person I was so wheat. I'm gonna do the first, second, third, fourth, fifth, knock this out, and resume, merge back onto life as a 22-year-old go back to being a club rat. This will be great. So I started this Goldilocks quest to figure out, how do I, in 21st century America, tend to loss? I couldn't really go to church because my family didn't really go to church, and many of us have lost connections to faith-based institutions. This used to be the place that kind of took care of the bereaved, but for many of us who are spiritual, not religious, or whose ancestral places of worship don't resonate with us anymore, we don't have this kind of temple or sanctuary to return to. I had amazing friends. I would take a bullet for my friends, but I was the first one in our friend group who'd ever experienced the death of a parent. So we had gone through every other milestone together. We had sex for the first time around the same time, not with each other, but, well, we talk about that in a different talk. We graduated, went to college for the first time, moved out of our home for the first time, but when my dad died, I was the only one that had experienced parent loss, and they could show up for me, but they couldn't really get me. I have an amazing therapist, but the conversation would really get going at minute 47, and then she'd be like, I'd see her eyes going to the clock behind me. I did find some excellent support groups, but generally I found that they were cold, institutional. One that I was invited to was in the basement below the building where my dad had gotten radiation, circle of metal folding chairs, not the vibe, not the place I felt like I wanted to go to heal. And a lot of the more traditional support groups were filled with people who were losing a parent at a more natural age in life. So I was 21, they were 55, and I felt even more isolated. So I did try some kids support groups, but they started passing a teddy bear around like a talking stick, and I was like, I am a tax-paying person. The googly eyes and grief didn't do it for me. And then there was this sort of general vibe that people didn't know how to talk to me about the fact that my dad had just died. There was this awkward changing of the subject, this deer in the headlights look that I kept facing. So I was like, this can't be all we've got. Human beings have been grieving for a super long time. Is this it? Is this the cultural bar around how we tend to this incredible major rite of passage? So I went back to Google, bless her, and started to realize that if you zoom out from our cultural lens, human beings have honored the dead in the most technicolored, beautiful ways. It's been gilded and winged. It's been burning a Viking boat and sending it out to sea warrior style. It's been a cuddle puddle with your friends wearing gorgeous robes. It's been literally holding hands with death and dancing around the grave, not ignoring or sweeping under the rug or denying, but genuinely embracing the dance that we're all doing here on earth between life and death. It's been feasts and tableaus. It's been ripping the shirt from your chest with the intensity of the emotion you're feeling. It's been gathering in a circle. There has been a beat. It's been crazy land art architecture that's just gorgeous. It's been bright and candlelit and has tasted sweet, and it has been adorned with fresh flowers. It's been frickin' fuchsia. It's had a beat, it's had a base. There are other ways that we can tend to grief beyond just the simply, I'm sorry for your loss. So I started to process everything I was learning, and I was like, okay, so maybe there is a different way I can tend to my grief. I thought about the place I missed my dad the most acutely, the dinner table. And I wondered if there might be a way that I could create my own kind of, feasting the dead. And if there might be other people who'd want to gather around a table, not under the fluorescent lights of an institutional support group, but in somebody's home, and create an experience to talk about our grief that felt warm and human. But first I was like, ooh, who wants to do that too? I assumed I was kind of the only person who was longing for that, because obviously if other people wanted that, it would exist, right? So this is when I'm going to invite you to bring somebody else into the room. Close your eyes again. Thank you. Take another breath. We had person number one. We're going to feel the chair under our butts again. I want you to think of a time where you have felt off, isolated, alone, and somebody has reached out to you or said something or texted you a message, or you've read in a book about a character that pierced through that kind of bubble that you felt between yourself and the world, and had the thing that you needed to hear to realize, oh wait, I'm not alone. My person, you can open your eyes again, that person for me was Lennon. Lennon and I were coworkers at a magazine. We'd worked together for many months before we went for a coffee walk one day, and on the walk back, I let it slip awkwardly that my dad had recently died, thinking like, oh God, stop, like, don't be so weird. And Lennon said, my mom died of cancer too. And it was the most surprising, delightful response because it meant that I had a friend who knew what it had been like. But before we knew it, we were back in the office, open floor plan, everybody could hear our conversation, and we're like, okay, see you later. We didn't really have a chance to talk about it. So I sent her an email, super emo, super long email, timestamp 2010. Lennon recently sent this to me. And I kind of vulnerably was like, do you want to hang out and talk about this? I said, I find that I'm craving candid and carefree time with the women and men who have walked those hallways late at night, understand in that way the meaning of love and goodbye, and are using their experiences to springboard into richer, more honest, and more open-hearted lives. You, my dear, seem to be one of those people. So she came over to dinner, and 4 other people came with her. Everyone had experienced the death of someone close to them, awkward first date, kind of blind date, social experiment energy, and it was exquisite because we all were finally allowed to have the conversation that we'd been longing to have but never had the right container to go there in. And to make something really hard actually seem like it was so easy, no big deal. That original dinner, people started reaching out to us, wanted to come. We started to ask, what's happening here? How do we help support other people to host their own dinners? And over the course of the last 15 years, this has become a nationwide organization called The Dinner Party that, thank you, that connects, that helps people connect with other folks first in their neighborhood and now virtually who are longing for the kinds of spaces to come together, not just to talk about their loss, but to build companionship with people who get it, who they can be real with, they can go beyond the platitudes with. And it's real people gathering regularly all across the country. We've created affinity spaces for people who want to just sit in community with other folks that share their life experience. This is a 1-year anniversary birthday party for a table that happened a few years ago. And to date, there's been 20,000 people have been a part of this community and have sat down to dinner. 150 tables have launched in New York City alone since 2019, and 97% of people who we've surveyed would recommend this to a friend. In fact, 81% already have. It's working. In fact, the Washington Post says it's like therapy, but better. But stay in therapy too, it's good. It's compliments, people. So you can go on our website right now and browse tables and join a table, and if you don't find the table that is right for you, you can sign up to do a volunteer host training and host your own. Missing our people in DC, partner loss in Philly, Tampa Bay Saddies, we love it. So back to her, this sweetheart who is the Google image search result for grief. I mean, I don't want to troll her, she's obviously having a bad day. But I'm like, hold on a second, there is so much more to the visual culture and to the experience of grief than just this. And what I started to realize is that there's this spirit that I was connecting with in conversations with people around the table that I started to think of and refer to as renegade grief, which means we're defecting from the status quo that would have us sweep our grief under the rug, pretend like nothing happened, and actually turn to face it, and in stepping over the threshold of a major loss, use it for grist for some of our most deep conversations, our most powerful friendships, our deepest creative inspiration. I started hearing stories around the table of people like Maggie, who on the death anniversary of her dad every year, instead of binging Netflix alone in her room, hosts a pasta party because making pasta was a thing her and her dad did and loved so much. And it's now an annual standing party where people get to come together, celebrate her, celebrate the memory of her dad, and like carbo load. I learned about a woman named Misty who, when her mother died, her dad really dove head into a drinking habit that meant they had a lot of leftover bottles around the house. She felt claustrophobic in the home. So she started taking the bottles and built a bottle house for herself in her backyard, inspired by Grandma Prisbrey, this woman who's an incredible folk artist in Southern California. She literally took the material that was part of the heartbreak of her story and used it to create a sanctuary for herself. People like Saul Guy, who found these direct-to-camera interviews that his dad had done with himself as he was preparing to die, and after lugging these videotapes around for 20 years, finally decided to make art with them, and his film, The Death of My Two Fathers, is now streaming on PBS. People like Janelle, who was like, I want to be able to write a letter to my mom, even though she's dead. So not only did she do that for herself, she set up a frickin' postal service for the dead art project where anyone can send letters in, written to someone who's no longer physically present. She'll collect them and she'll put them in an archive for you, always remembered. I love the stories I've heard of people who are like, my grief is intense, the pain is real, but fuck whatever the thing was that caused me to enter this in the first place. This is an example of a story of Magnus's parents, who Magnus was killed in a cycling accident. They're actively changing laws in the state of Colorado where he was from, changing technology in cars to be safer for cyclists. We can actually use our grief not just to hold our head in our hands, but to be jet fuel for the world that we want to live in, for the activism that we believe in. This is less virtuous than changing laws, but my siblings and I have turned to Dungeons and Dragons. It's awesome. I don't know if you're into this, and you can read about it in The Guardian from last week. So it can be like, I've heard about these renegade grief stories that are serious, that are silly, that are niche, that are mainstream, but it ends up there's so many other ways that we can treat our grief like a verb, a thing that we are tending to, not just a noun we are distancing ourselves from. But like, why does this have to be so renegade? Shouldn't this just be like how it is? I'm gonna give you a little history lesson. You guys came all the way to 59th Street, you gotta learn a couple things. There are 3 important times that I wanna draw our attention to, 3 reasons why I think that Western culture kinda lost the plot. Sigmund Freud, I don't wanna throw him under the bus, but he wrote this treatise in 1917 called Mourning and Melancholia. And the TLDR, too long didn't read, is that if you are still missing your person, you're a little cuckoo bananas. Basically, his advice to the psychological community was break bonds. After a certain amount of time, you've got to let them go, not talk about them, move on. It set a domino off where this became like the commonplace Western psychology best practice. But then the story within the story that breaks my heart for him is a few years later, his beloved daughter died, and he actually entered the club. And he wrote in a private letter to his friend, like, ooh, like, whoops. Actually, no matter what may fill the gap, even if it be filled completely, it nevertheless remains the same. Grief is actually continuing to be a part of my story. I can't break bonds with my beloved daughter. But like the damage had already been done, and his paradigm remains the kind of mainstream psychological paradigm of how we should relate to grief. Big whoopsies. Here's another Swiss miss, Tina, shout out. This lady is a badass. Her name's Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. She, in the 60s, released really groundbreaking work where she was sitting with dying people and actually asking them, like, what's this like for you? Versus all the clinical research that had done before that never actually asked the human being what the experience was like. She's the person that came up with the 5 stages of grieving. She's rolling over in her grave because never, ever, ever was it meant to be like, check bargaining box, move on to acceptance box, move on to denial box, and then you're done. We have this obsession with oversimplifying concepts in this culture and creating like a simple checklist for ourselves. Elizabeth was clear that you will grieve forever. This is a part of the human experience. There is no completion date to it. You will not get over the loss of a loved one. You will learn to live with it. The number of conversations I've had with people who are grieving where they're like, I'm almost to the 5th box. And yet it's a ruse, it's a trap, we're being gaslit, it's not how it actually is. And then this is the 3rd historical figure, Robert Putnam. I mean, look at this sweetheart. He wrote a book called Bowling Alone in 2000, 25 years ago, and he's like, guys, the social fabric is unraveling. We no longer have the places to go where we can be in community with one another. We just go to work, hang out with our nuclear family. We're losing this kind of 3rd place that is really essential to a healthy society. Fast forward, Robert Putnam, the prophet that he was, we're now in this like really kind of terrifying crisis of loneliness. I don't know if you know this, but social isolation has a bigger impact on mortality than smoking 15 cigarettes a day or having 6 drinks a day. Pick your poison. And you might wonder, like, oh, wait, grief talk, she's going off topic, what's this lady talking about? To me, what we're losing in the dissolution of the social fabric are the places that we used to go to where we could be held in our grief. And then this sweetheart came along, Vivek Murthy, the former US Surgeon General. He talks about the power of us actually being the medicine that each other needs. That it's not just the clinical support that we need, it's not just the psychiatric support, the pills, the pathologizing. What we need is one another. And we have to find ways to re-enter into community and connection with one another. So what I realized is that actually the grief itself is not the problem. The grief is this insanely exquisite human technology that we have hardwired into our beings that helps us process the fact that we are all going to die. I don't know if you know that, but that's kind of like, that's what's happening here. And grief allows us to be like, oh shit, this is temporary. How do I want to live differently? The problem is the things getting in the way of actually letting grief do its thing and forcing us to, when it does do its thing, do it alone. So this is my animating question that I'm obsessed with, and I hope that you're like 1 to 10 degrees more obsessed with it too after this talk. What if each of us could go renegade by turning the source of our deepest isolation into the place where we're actually finding and accessing our healing and our community support? How do we start jujitsu flipping the things that are making us feel far away from people, and by leaning in, actually find the solves that we're all looking for? Because COVID, 5-year anniversary of COVID lockdowns happening, rising rates of school shootings, Los Angeles just burned down. I don't know if you guys heard. Democracy is we're kind of tilting a little bit right now. This is all grief, too. Too often we only think that we grieve something when a person dies, but we're grieving every day. And by giving ourselves permission to actually name the fact that this too is grief can allow us to get to the root of what it is we're feeling, such that we stop sticking our heads in the sand, doom scrolling till we're numbed out, and not actually equipped or able to take the action that's necessary. Walter Brueggemann is this amazing biblical scholar. He talks about the 3 urgent prophetic tasks to face the era that we're entering into. We've got to face the truth. We also have to have hope. But before we can get to hope, we have to grieve what it is we're losing, the reality of the world we're living in. So that's my invitation to you today. So what happens when we reframe grief from this sort of niche mental health issue that we regard as psychologically unhealthy, like get over it, get it together, something that we deal with on our own, to actually a radical act, to a critical life skill, to a muscle that will make or break whether we can meet this moment? I would even suggest a portal to hope and resolution to some of the big heartbreaks of our time. So what I wish I could tell this little angel, myself, okay, I'm an angel. I was when I was 5 or whenever this was. I wish I could tell her, listen, some things are going to happen in your life that are going to be brutal. It's not always going to be easy, but trust the hardwiring that is inside of your human spirit that knows how to surf the waves of really challenging times. And then I would tell her a quick 3-step process to do it. Telling her also it's not a box to check, but just 3 sort of themes, right? I would tell her to crew up. Find people who you can be real with, who you feel supported by, who you can witness. I would tell her to commit to finding the care practices that help you turn your grief from something that you're pushing away into fodder for your creative process. And I would tell her to be a part of championing this grief renaissance that I truly believe we're all living in. This isn't the only way that we can tend to it. I would also tell her that there would be these kind of parallel figures in her life. There would be her dad, and then there would be Lennon. And that while these people would never meet in person, Lennon would actually come to learn a lot about her dad. It's so weird to talk about myself in the third person that way, but it's fine. And for my dad, who would never meet Lennon, I would tell him that your story is going to become inextricably linked with this amazing girl from North Carolina who you'll never meet, but who will become such an important person in my life. And I would also tell her that sometimes the things that feel like our most devastating endings, if we lean into them, can also become our most profound and beautiful beginnings. And I'd also tell her that she could read this book in, about 20 years. This is my book, Renegade Grief. It just came out on Tuesday, fresh off the press. If you're interested in learning more about the book, you can order it today. And if the dinner party sounds like a crew that you also want to join, please scan that QR code and sign up for a table. All right, thanks everybody so much.